Judgment has been reserved in government's application for leave to appeal a Pretoria High Court ruling which found some lockdown regulations irrational. Judge Norman Davies has granted the state 14 days to make some amendments to the rules, but according to the Social Justice and COVID-19 Policy and Relief Monitoring Alliance, while aspects of the Davies judgment are flawed, the judgment itself contains key lessons that government should not ignore. Now, this was discussed in a recent roundtable looking into the rule of law when regulating public life. Now joined by the convener of that dialogue and Stellenbosch University's Social Justice Chair, that's Professor Madonsela. Prof, thanks very much for your time and welcome to the AM Report. So in many respects, this whole saga, the legal tussle and the back and forth have raised real questions around the exercise of power, exercise perhaps of public power under the Disaster Management Act. Do you think we're asking the right questions around the constitutionality of these rules?
We certainly are asking the right questions, and Judge Davies, in the DBA judgment, has asked the right questions. The right questions being, the first one being, did government consider the human rights implications of the decisions it was going to make in designing the regulations? And in considering the human rights implications, a lot of attention is paid by the judge to freedom of movement, family life and social cohesion, the criminalization of people and human dignity implications thereof, and the right to commercial activity, which is a right in the Constitution. So the judgment is not questioning the fact that these rights may be limited. It's simply asking the question, before they were limited, was that question asked, and were alternatives to these restrictions taken? So that's the judge's question. From the government side, it makes sense to question the judgment because it went beyond what it was supposed to do, and it does need specificity. But for us as the public, our question should be, is the judgment helping us to hold government accountable?
And insofar as that is concerned, how do you think the public has fared? Because in many respects, it almost feels like the response from the general public has been insofar as we're impacted, again, insofar as, limits to our movement is concerned, access to certain things like alcohol and cigarettes, etc., etc. But are we hitting the nail on the head, do you feel, about interrogating that very aspect of this tussle?
There hasn't been sufficient debate or dialogue on the judgment, and presumably because we don't particularly know the applicants. We don't know Mr. DBA, we don't know the two NPOs that are involved, and I think that has diminished public interest in the judgment. However, we should ask those questions for the purposes of the rule of law. We should also ask those questions for the purposes of making sure that laws that are passed and that regulate our lives are easy to comply with. And a lot of people are not asking questions because they're going on with their lives. I had a funeral in the family the other day, and people were doing what they normally do, regardless of the regulations.
Incredibly interesting, isn't it? Because it certainly gives us the impression that no matter what the judges find, or no matter what government does in response to that, change in public behavior is not likely to really be altered that much. And that, I guess, brings up the question around the role of these court battles, if you like, in contributing to us flattening the curve, so to speak.
Exactly. I think public behavior can change if the laws are reasonable. Access to justice requires that we understand the laws, that we have input in how laws are designed, and above everything else, that the laws are easy to comply with. You remember in my letter to the President, I quoted Anthony d'Exupery, when he talks in The Little Prince about the importance of reasonable laws. So if people are behaving the way they're behaving, it's because it's not possible or reasonably possible to behave the way government wants them to behave. And the judge deals with 3 areas that government must, out of compassion and out of smartness, review. The first one is the criminalization of ordinary people's conduct. How the lady with Archer was dealt with is the way my parents were dealt with under apartheid. And this is wrong in democracy, that ordinary people who are trying to make a living are treated like ordinary criminals. And that young people who have been caught up in violating the smallest of the regulations will now have criminal records that will prevent them from having jobs. That is something government must pay attention to. Then there's a question of family life. Nothing in the liberalization of these regulations has dealt with family life. Government should learn from England. We don't just have health and commerce. We have life. There has to be something that is done to liberalize family visits and related things.
It's very interesting you say that, because, I mean, other people had pointed out that you can go to the salon, you can possibly watch a movie, you can do all these things, but you can't meet with your family. And I guess that's the aspect you're alluding to. But, you know, there's also, Prof, been a lot of commentary around how this is, by and large, uncharted territory. And I wonder whether we've been charitable enough to the state because of that. You know, there's no blueprint about ways through which you can respond to this, and it's much easier being critical in hindsight, isn't it?
No, certainly. We criticize the government because we're not in the arena, and obviously it's more difficult to be government, but government could make it easier for itself by involving experts. So one of the things we mention in our policy brief to government is, please implement the Disaster Management Act. There's a structure there that would bring more wisdom to the party, that is in terms of Section 5. But that said, I do think that government has done a great job, but a lot of it has been copycatting. England is beginning to do a little bit better because it's going beyond copycatting. Because if we're going to confine ourselves to what we saw being done in China and New Zealand, we're going to fall flat, because there's a difference in those societies and ours. There's something we can copy, but we can't replicate things as they are. What we do need at this stage is innovation. And we can't expect government to innovate all by itself. Hence, the Disaster Management Act requires a collaborative approach. And lastly, this matter must be formally taken over by the president. No country is having a minister respond to this huge disaster. In every country, it's the head of state that makes these decisions. And I understand that they're confined by law to use the minister, but they can change that without even changing the law. They can reassign the management of this process back to the president.